Belarus, winter 1941. The wind moved through the empty village streets like a ghost, carrying the faint sound of boots, a scream, a door slamming. War had come, sudden and absolute, erasing everything that used to mean safety. Among the thousands who fled, one woman stayed behind a moment too long, watching her school burn. Her name was Tatyana Baramzina, 23 years old, a teacher from the city of Glazov. She had taught children how to read, how to write, how to hope. Now she was watching letters melt into ash, the beginning of a different life. Before the war, Tatyana's world had been small, quiet, and filled with promise. She was known for her calmness, the kind of woman who spoke softly even when angry. Her students adored her. She used to sit by the window after lessons, grading papers as sunlight filtered through the glass. She believed in kindness, and in the idea that people, given time, could become better. But in June 1941, that belief shattered. When the German invasion began, her school became a field hospital overnight. She stayed to help the wounded until the last possible moment. By the time the Red Army retreated, Tatyana was already walking, alone, through fields on fire. In her notebook, found years later, one line was underlined twice. "If the world can destroy beauty, then I will learn to defend it." That was the moment she decided to go to war, the call to arms. In 1942, she applied to the Central Women's Sniper Training School near Moscow. At first, the officers laughed. She was small, gentle, with soft eyes and a teacher's hands. But when they handed her a Mosin Nagant rifle, she took it in silence and hit the target dead center, 3 times. "You were a teacher?" "I still am," she answered. "Only the lessons have changed." Sniper training was brutal. They learned to crawl through snow for hours, to shoot between heartbeats, to blend into the earth itself. At night, they wrote letters to families they might never see again. Tatyana's letters were calm, deliberate, like the reports she used to write at school. "Do not worry, Mama. I feel I am doing something necessary. We must all give what we can. Some give strength. I give my eyes and my patience." By graduation, she was one of the top students, precise, disciplined, and unnervingly steady. Her comrades began calling her Tanya the Quiet, baptism by fire. Her first mission came in the summer of 1943, near Smolensk. The forest was thick with fog. Visibility was no more than 50 meters. She lay still for 10 hours, unmoving, breathing through her scarf to muffle the sound. When the first German patrol appeared, she did not fire immediately. She waited, watching, calculating wind, distance and movement. Then a single shot echoed through the trees. One man fell. She disappeared. By the end of her first week, she had recorded 5 confirmed kills. Her commander wrote in his report, "Calm, intelligent, never misses. Her mind is her weapon." But after each mission, she returned to camp quieter, withdrawn. She cleaned her rifle like a ritual, then read poetry to herself by candlelight. She never celebrated. Her fellow sniper Valentina once asked her, "Don't you feel proud?" Tatyana replied, "No one should feel proud of ending a life, even if it is necessary." Between duty and conscience, the war hardened her, but it never stole her compassion. Once, during a raid on a German outpost, she found a wounded enemy soldier no older than her students. He was crying for water. Without a word, she gave him hers, then continued the mission. Her commander later scolded her. She only said, "If I stop being human, then they've already won." As months turned to years, her legend began to grow. She was credited with over 16 confirmed kills, trained new recruits, and was eventually reassigned to a frontline rifle unit as a medical orderly and sniper. Her superiors doubted the decision. Why send a skilled marksman to carry the wounded? But she insisted. It is better to save one life than to take 10. The road to Belarus. By the summer of 1944, the Soviet army was pushing west through Belarus during Operation Bagration. Entire villages were liberated and destroyed in the same day. Tatyana volunteered for a frontline assault near the town of Molodechno, a mission to retake a crucial railway line. The night before the attack, She sat by the fire with her comrades, writing her last letter. "Do not fear for me," she wrote. "If I fall, I will fall as I lived, trying to make something right." At dawn, she picked up her rifle and her medic's bag. The teacher who once corrected grammar was now correcting the balance of fate itself. She began as a woman of peace and became a soldier of conscience. And as the sun rose over the forests of Belarus, she walked toward the front. Not to kill, but to protect. Summer 1944. The forests of Belarus were alive with heat and thunder. The ground trembled with artillery fire, and the air smelled of smoke, soil, and iron. For Tatyana Baramzina, it was the first time she'd fought this close to the edge, not from a hidden nest, but side by side with the men she once patched up in field tents. The line between life and death. Her new unit, the 252nd Rifle Regiment, moved through the forests near the town of Vitebsk. The Germans had dug in deep fortified positions hidden in the marshes. Every step forward was a risk. Tatyana carried both her rifle and her medic's satchel. She no longer thought about glory, only about survival. When bullets snapped through the trees, she moved first toward the fallen, crawling through mud, pressing rags against wounds, whispering, "You'll live, you must." Sometimes she didn't even know their names, only their blood type, only their faces. At night, when the shelling stopped, she cleaned her weapon with hands that shook from exhaustion. To her comrades, she was both a healer and a ghost, someone who appeared when death did, and sometimes won the argument. The return of the rifle. During one operation near Orsha, her unit was ambushed. The first German shot dropped the platoon leader. The second shattered the radio. Tatyana took cover behind a fallen tree, pulled the rifle from her back, and aimed through the heat haze. Her shot struck clean. One down, then another. In less than 2 minutes, the forest fell silent. Her comrades stared. No one had realized she was that good. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "At school," she said quietly. "I had to keep my students' attention." By dusk, she had saved 2 lives and killed 5 enemies. No one called her soft again. The wounds you don't see. After each battle, she treated the wounded before resting herself. She never asked for help, never cried, but the other medics noticed how her hands trembled when she was alone, not from fear, but from the weight of what she carried. In her diary she wrote, "A sniper's eyes must see clearly, a nurse's heart must not, but I have both, and it hurts." She kept a small piece of paper folded inside her breast pocket, a drawing one of her pupils had given her years earlier. It showed a bird flying above a schoolyard. She never let it out of her sight. The assault at Molodechno. On July 5, 1944, her regiment was ordered to take the village of Pekalin near Molodechno. The Germans held the high ground, supported by machine guns and mortars. The assault would be deadly, but it had to succeed. The advance depended on it. Tatyana volunteered for the forward group. She carried no bandages that day, only her rifle and 2 grenades. "Why you?" asked her commander. "Because I can crawl lower than fear," she replied. As they moved through the wheat fields, enemy fire erupted from the tree line. Men fell around her. Tatyana dropped flat, aimed and fired twice. 2 gunners down. She kept moving forward, dragging the wounded as she went. The shell exploded nearby, throwing her against the earth. Her hearing vanished, her vision blurred. Still she crawled toward the sound of pain. By noon the Germans were retreating. By evening the field was silent, except for the cries of the dying. Tatyana had been hit in the leg and shoulder but refused evacuation. "Others need the stretchers," she told the medics. That night she sat in the ruins of a barn, cleaning her rifle with trembling hands, whispering the names of those she couldn't save. The weight of mercy. When her unit rested, she would wander away to sit by herself, listening to the forest breathe. She began to feel that the war wasn't just outside her anymore. It had entered her, quietly, like smoke. One evening a soldier approached and asked, "How many Germans have you killed, Tanya?" She didn't answer. He laughed and said, "You should be proud. You've done more than most men." She looked up and said softly, "If I ever start counting, I'll stop being human." To the end of the earth. In the days that followed, the regiment advanced deeper into enemy lines. Every kilometre cost lives. Tatyana's unit was down to half strength, exhausted but relentless. Her name began circulating through the division, the teacher who never misses. No one knew it yet, but her next mission would be her last. And in that final hour, the quiet schoolteacher from Glazov would perform an act so selfless, so brutal, that even hardened soldiers would whisper her name as a prayer. She had already faced death 100 times, but soon she would face it not as a sniper, but as a shield. Belarus, July 5th, 1944. The dawn broke red, not with sunrise but with fire. Mortar rounds struck the forest line, trees splintered, and the air itself seemed to scream. The 252nd Rifle Regiment was pinned down outside the small village of Pekalin, caught in a storm of German artillery. In the chaos, one squad, Tatyana's, was cut off behind enemy lines. Their radio had been destroyed. There was no retreat, no reinforcement. Only a handful of soldiers, one wounded officer, and Tatyana Baramzina, the sniper who had once been a teacher. The field of death. By mid-morning the heat was unbearable. The smoke hung low over the field, thick and grey, blinding them to the enemy's movements. Tatyana moved among the wounded, pressing her scarf against bleeding wounds, whispering, "You'll be all right. Breathe." A young soldier grabbed her wrist, his voice trembling. "Comrade, leave me. Save yourself." She shook her head. No one gets left behind. When the next shell exploded, it tore apart the field hospital tent. Her left arm was burned, her rifle cracked, but she refused to stop. The men saw her crawling through the dirt, dragging a stretcher behind her, bullets snapping past her head. To them she looked almost unreal, small, limping, but unstoppable. The encirclement. By noon, German troops had closed in from 3 sides. Machine guns raked the trenches, mortar fire cut off their escape. The officer in charge, barely conscious, ordered the survivors to fall back through the forest. Tatyana stayed. "Someone must cover them," she said. She picked up a new rifle from a fallen soldier and took position near a pile of sandbags. From there she began firing, precise, rhythmic, methodical. Each shot slowed the German advance. Each minute she bought gave another man a chance to crawl to safety. But when the rifle jammed, she grabbed a PPSH-41 submachine gun from the mud and kept shooting until the barrel smoked. Then she threw her last grenade and crouched beside a wounded comrade. "Don't look back," she whispered. "Keep crawling." The capture. She was still alive when the Germans reached the position. Her uniform was torn, her hands covered in blood, not all of it hers. The soldiers surrounded her, shouting, guns raised. She tried to reach for the pistol at her belt, but her arm wouldn't move. A German officer stepped forward, kicking her weapon aside. They demanded she reveal the locations of other Soviet snipers and medics. She said nothing. One of them struck her across the face. Still nothing. When they realized she would not talk, they dragged her to the center of the field, where the bodies of her comrades lay. There they beat her with rifle butts, then shot her in the legs. But even then, even bleeding, broken, she spat blood and said through her teeth, "You can kill me, but you cannot stop them." The execution. The soldiers tied her to a post outside a barn. Villagers, forced to watch, later said she stood straight until the end, her chin lifted, her gaze fixed beyond the horizon. When the officer raised his pistol, she looked him in the eye and said one word, "Rodina, Motherland." He fired once, then again. She did not fall right away. She died, standing, at 25 years old. The silence after. When Soviet troops recaptured Pekalin days later, they found her body among dozens of wounded men, those she had refused to abandon. One survivor later said, "She fought until her last breath. Even the Germans looked at her with something like fear." Her comrades buried her near the battlefield, marking the grave with a single rifle bayonet driven into the soil. On it, they carved 2 words with a knife: "For others." The teacher had become a soldier, the soldier had become a martyr, and the martyr had become eternal. Her rifle fell silent, but her story did not. Belarus, autumn 1944. The rains had washed away most of the blood, but not the memory. The fields around Pekalin were quiet now, the guns silent, the trenches filled in, wildflowers growing through rusted helmets. And yet, Among the soldiers who survived that summer, one name was whispered more than any other: Tatyana Baramzina. They had seen her die, or rather, they had seen her refuse to die until her duty was done, and in the strange, haunted calm that followed victory, they began to speak of her as something greater than human. Not out of superstition, out of gratitude. The survivor's testimony. The first official report came from a young lieutenant who had escaped thanks to her last stand. He told his superior, "She stayed behind so we could live. When I turned to look back, I saw her firing until her gun jammed." Another soldier, his voice breaking, said, "I heard her shouting at the wounded to crawl, even when she couldn't stand. She saved at least a dozen of us." The story spread fast, through the regiment, through the division, through every campfire where soldiers gathered to remember the fallen. Soon, her name was written into daily reports, not as a casualty, but as an example. In the official dispatch to Moscow, her commander wrote, "Comrade Baramzina displayed courage beyond human measure. She fulfilled her duty to the very end." The investigation. A commission from the Soviet High Command arrived in October to investigate the reports of heroism at Pekalin. They interviewed survivors, examined the site, and even spoke to local villagers who had been forced to witness her execution. One old woman, still trembling, told them, "She was tied to a post but did not cry. She looked up, as if she was looking at the sun." When the investigators exhumed her remains, they found the marks of torture on her body, and the remnants of her sniper uniform. Pinned to the torn fabric was a small metal cross, crudely made from a bullet casing. Someone, perhaps one of her comrades, had placed it there before burying her. The commission's conclusion was simple. Baramzina, Tatyana Nikolaevna, posthumously recommended for the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. The letter home. The news reached her hometown of Glazov weeks later. The telegram was addressed to her mother. It arrived on a cold November morning. It read, "Your daughter gave her life heroically in battle near the town of Molodechno. Her courage inspired all who fought beside her. Her name will live forever." Her mother wept silently. Then she took out Tatyana's old teaching journal and placed the telegram inside, between two pages that still smelled faintly of chalk and paper. The medal. On March 24, 1945, in the Great Hall of the Kremlin, her name was read among the heroes of the Soviet Union. The medal, the Gold Star, was presented to her mother, who held it without speaking. There were no speeches, no tears, just silence, and the weight of the metal in her hand. When she returned home, she placed the medal next to a framed photograph of Tatyana, the one taken before the war, where she is smiling faintly in her teacher's uniform. Under it she wrote by hand, "You taught us how to live. You taught us how to die." The memory of fire. In the years after the war, her story became legend in Belarus and Russia. Schools and streets bore her name. A monument was built near Molodechno, at the site of her last battle. A stone figure of a woman holding a rifle, her face calm, her eyes lifted toward the horizon. Every year on the anniversary of her death, veterans and children came to lay flowers. Many of them didn't know her full story. They only knew she had been the teacher who fought like a soldier and died like a saint. One veteran, when asked about her, said quietly, "There are people who fight to survive, and there are people who fight so others can. She was the second kind." The legacy. Time softened the edges of the war, but not her memory. For generations of students, her name became a symbol of devotion, of courage without cruelty, of strength without hatred. Historians still debate how many enemies she killed, how long she fought, how exactly she died. But those numbers don't matter. What matters is that she made her choice, not for revenge, not for glory, but for love. Because before she was a sniper, she was a teacher. And even on the battlefield, she never stopped teaching what it means to stand, to protect, and to give everything for others. She never wrote a book. She left no speech, no memoir, only a story carried in the hearts of those who lived because she refused to run. And that is what makes a hero eternal. Spring, 1950. The war was over, yet its echoes still lingered in every classroom, every song, every silence between two generations. Children born after the guns fell quiet learned about the victory not from soldiers, but from stories. Stories told in whispers, in textbooks, in the trembling voices of mothers who had lost everything. Among those names, always written in gold, was one that sounded gentle: Tatyana Nikolaevna Baramzina. A name not of a general or a pilot, but of a schoolteacher who went to war and never came home. The making of a legend. By the 1950s, the Soviet Union was rebuilding itself, brick by brick, life by life. Heroes became symbols, faces printed on posters, names carved on marble. But Tatyana's story stood apart. She was not a commander, not a figure of command or ideology. She was ordinary, and that made her extraordinary. In the new textbooks printed for Soviet schools, her portrait appeared beside lines of solemn text. Comrade Baramzina, teacher, sniper, hero of the Motherland, fell in battle near Molodechno in July 1944. Teachers told her story to children who were her age when she died, and in every retelling the room went silent. She became an ideal, a symbol of the purest form of patriotism: quiet, intelligent, compassionate courage. A hero not born for war but shaped by it, the films and the memory. In the 1960s, filmmakers came to Glazov, her hometown, to interview those who had known her. Her surviving students remembered her voice, calm, soft, patient. She spoke as if she never wanted to hurt anyone, one said. When they showed them the script for the planned film, The Sniper from Glazov, the students cried. The actress chosen to play her said, "I don't want to act her. I want to understand how a woman can die without hatred." The film, released years later, was simple. No grand speeches, no exaggerated heroism. Just a girl with a rifle in the fog, whispering to the wounded, her eyes filled with both sorrow and strength. And when the final scene showed her walking alone into the burning field, theatres across the country fell silent. Because even in fiction, she remained real. The school that bears her name. In Glazov, her old school was rebuilt and renamed in her honour. School number 2, named after hero of the Soviet Union, T.N. Baramzina. A bronze bust was placed at the entrance, surrounded by lilacs she once loved. Every September 1st, on the first day of classes, students gather by that monument. They bring flowers and recite her last words. "If I fall, I will fall as I lived, trying to make something right." Inside, her classroom has been preserved. The chalkboard still bears faint lines from her lessons, restored from her wartime notebooks. A single desk sits in the corner with her photo on it, the same gentle smile, untouched by time. The real woman behind the hero, but behind the legend was still a woman, one who wrote poetry in her diary, who feared the sound of thunder, who missed her mother's hands and the warmth of a home. She was not carved from iron or made of slogans. She was fragile, and that fragility made her courage so real. A letter found decades later, written just before her final battle, reads, "I sometimes think of my students. I hope they remember not that I killed, but that I tried to protect. If I die, let it not be in vain." That letter was never sent. It was found in her satchel, stained with dirt and blood, and yet, in a way, it reached them. Through history, through memory, through the generations who grew up learning her name. The immortal lesson. Today, in Belarus and Russia, her statues still stand, silent, calm, surrounded by trees. Tourists walk by, children run past, but every so often someone stops. They read the inscription and whisper, "She was a teacher." And in that moment, the war feels close again, not as noise, but as a heartbeat. Because her story is not just about death or bravery, it is about choice. The choice to stay when others run, to heal when others destroy, to protect when there is nothing left to protect. Heroes are not born from strength, they are born from conscience. And though the years pass and monuments fade, the lesson of Tatyana Baramzina endures. That kindness can stand taller than any rifle, and courage can wear the face of a teacher. Summer, many years later. The war is long gone, but its ghosts still walk quietly through the forests of Belarus. The wind moves through the fields of Pekalin, bending the grass the way rifle fire once did, and if you listen closely, you can almost hear a voice, calm, soft, steady, whispering through the leaves. "Don't be afraid. That voice belongs to Tatyana Baramzina, though decades have passed since she spoke it aloud. Her name lives not only in books or medals, but in the memory of a nation that still measures courage by her example. The pilgrimage. Every July, soldiers, teachers and students travel to the monument that stands where she died. It is not large, just a figure in bronze holding a rifle lowered at her side, her face lifted slightly toward the sky. No triumph, no anger, only calm. On the anniversary of her death, the silence there is different. Not heavy, but reverent. Veterans place red carnations on the stone base. Children read poems written in her honour. A teacher always says the same words. She was one of us. And that is why she matters still. Because she was not a legend when she lived. She was ordinary. And yet, in her ordinariness, she became eternal. The echo across generations. In post-war decades, her story was retold again and again, sometimes faithfully, sometimes embellished. Writers called her the saint of the snipers, the guardian of Belarus, the last lesson. But beyond the titles, her truth stayed the same. She had been a young woman who simply refused to run. In Glazov, the school children still learn her biography, but the teachers also speak of her heart. They read her letters aloud, her handwriting slanted and soft. They tell their students, this is what real bravery looks like. Not shouting, not killing, but standing for others. One of her students, now an old man, once said in an interview, "When I was afraid, I thought of her, and I stood a little straighter." The forgotten photograph. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of her death, a local historian discovered a photograph, faint, damaged by time, in an old family chest. It showed Tatyana in her teaching uniform, standing before a class of smiling children. Her hands were clasped behind her back, her expression half serious, half warm. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, were 3 words: "For a better world." It was her handwriting, and somehow those words carried more power than all the medals and monuments combined. The mirror of time. If you visit her grave today, you will find not a soldier's monument, but a woman's face, soft, human, kind. And if you look closely, you might see your own reflection in the bronze. That, perhaps, is her final lesson, that courage does not belong to the past. It is something we inherit and must prove again and again. Her name now stands beside the greats, Pavlichenko, Litviak, Sendler, Skarbek. But unlike most, she left number command, no victory, no legacy of strategy. She left only this, the quiet proof that love can exist even in hell. Epilogue. In the archives of the Ministry of Defence, her file remains. It contains a few reports, one blurred photograph, and a single handwritten sentence by her commander. She died as she lived, protecting others. That line has been copied into thousands of books, spoken in classrooms, carved into stone, but its real meaning is not in the words. It is in the silence that follows them. Because silence was her language, the silence of patience, of sacrifice, of duty carried without complaint. And somewhere, beyond time and fire and grief, the teacher still walks those fields, watching the children who no longer know her name, smiling softly, as if to say, the world is still learning. Her rifle is gone, her voice remains, and through the centuries, the lesson of Tatyana Baramzina endures, that true strength is quiet, and true heroes teach, even after death.